Hey, what's going on, everybody here? Welcome once again. It's another Saturday night. Welcome back to the STS here. Yes, this is episode 3, I think it is. STS here, streaming here on Facebook Live. And I came across an article today. Came across the good old desk. And I wanted to go over it because it's an older article, but it reminded me of a story. And I wanted to talk about this because oftentimes I hear people, especially when it relates to talking to religion or arguing or war or anything else like that, you'll have a lot of people that say they don't want to or they don't believe in. Like, I don't believe in God. Well, I don't want to, we're not going to war. Well, okay. You don't necessarily have to believe in something in order for it to be true. And tonight I'm going to do a couple different things to prove that. First and foremost, when we talk about like war, bullies, fighting somebody, you may be the biggest pacifist in the world. You may not want to actually fight anybody, but it doesn't change the fact that, well, if somebody wants to fight you, you're either getting your ass kicked or you're going to actually be fighting back. In all cases, you may not want to fight, but fists are going to be thrown. Now, whether or not you defend yourself is going to be a whole nother story. You may not want to go to war as a country, but that doesn't necessarily mean that another country doesn't want to go to war with you. World War II is a prime example of that case. And as it relates to religion here, well, that's an even more interesting and tricky one. And I want to make the attempt to share my screen here. I've done this before. It hasn't necessarily worked out the best, but we're going to try it anyway. All right, we're going to pop over here. So the article itself, it's an older article. We're looking about 5 years ago. And for those of you guys that are familiar with my work here on the Caramel Conservative, on that podcast, our website, plusultramedia.com, you guys would know that I am not a fan of this Pope by any stretch of the imagination. Never have been. The guy, you know what? Give credit where credit is due. Here's an individual who certainly has done his charitable works and all the other good stuff to advance within the hierarchy of the church. However, I find his quote unquote progressive, or as I appropriately like to call it, regressive stances are to be very communist. And in a lot of ways, I find that not necessarily surprising considering the tutelage of the Catholic Church, especially when you're dealing with communes. By the way, commune is the root word of communist. Now, this particular Pope is a very collectivist type of individual, and a lot of people on the left love him. Now, in this article here from the Independent out in the UK, again dated back here October of 2015, the Pope here made note that he assured atheists you don't have to believe in God to go to heaven. And this is one of those things to me, just reading the headline here. And one of the things I always warn people about is that when you read headlines of these things, you got to be very careful because, well, the headlines is clickbait. And for many people, what they end up doing is they just they knee-jerk react to the article headline. What you need to do, of course, is actually get into the story, read into the meat and potatoes, and kind of break it down from there. So in this particular article, it reads here, in comments likely to enhance his progressive reputation, Pope Francis has written a long, open letter to the founder of La Repubblica newspaper, Eugenio, oh my goodness, Scalafari, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, stated that non-believers would be forgiven by God if they followed their consciousness. Interesting. Follow your conscience. All right, that's all you got to do to get into heaven. Responding to a list of questions published by the paper and by the founder, who is not a Roman Catholic, Francis wrote, "You asked me of God, The God of Christians forgives those who do not believe and who don't seek the faith. I start by saying, and this is the fundamental thing, that God's mercy has no limits if you go to him with a sincere and contrite heart. The issue for those who do not believe in God is to obey their conscience. That's kind of interesting. Now, I'm not a biblical scholar by any stretch of the imagination. I'm not anyone who's going to sit here and claim that I know every verse and all the breakdowns and all that other jazz. But something I do know is when it comes to the Catholic faith, when it comes to, well, there's a couple things I know, actually. Number one, the God of Christians is just God, the God of all that ever is, was, and will be. The other thing is that, well, I seem to remember reading that there's only one way through the Father, and that's through Jesus Christ, our Lord and Savior. So it begs a couple questions here. If you're an atheist, somebody who doesn't believe, why exactly would you even want to go to heaven? Why would you care? Or is this one of those little kind of last minute deals where you die, you go before judgment, you're like, oh my God, it's real. Oh man. Well, I hope I did enough good deeds here throughout my time on earth, through my time in life. Well, I don't necessarily know if that's how that works or not, but that's the interesting thing about religion. That's the interesting thing about faith, is the very fact that, well, it's always open to interpretation. And I think that's what's kind of scary when you think about it, because that interpretation is what millions and millions of people will follow, especially if you're the head of a particular church. Yes, it's a Saturday night, having myself a little Jack and Coke. It's all good. Oh my God, does my conscience allow for this? I don't know. Well, anyway, it was an interesting read here because the article itself, it continues that sin, even those who have faith, exists when people disobey their conscience. See, and here's the thing. Are you disobeying your conscience or are you disobeying the will of God? So there is a difference between the two. And what about the individuals that have no conscience, the sociopaths, those that with mental defects, things of that nature? So there's a lot more at play here than what the Pope here is carrying on about. Now, this here reminds me of a story. And I don't know about you guys, but I love books. I love reading. I'm huge into audiobooks. Over the last 6-7 months, I think ever since this pandemic kicked off, I've really gotten into audiobooks. And so I've had the opportunity to listen to a number of stories, and one of them, and you don't necessarily have to sign up to Audible or anything else like that, but you can go on YouTube and find a number of different narrations on some books, some stories. I've kind of gotten into the horror genre as of late, and it's actually been very interesting because for those of you that don't know, there's websites called Creepypasta. And Creepypasta has a number of different writers, stories, individuals like you, me, everyone else. And there are these narrators out there. I mean, just phenomenal in what they do, just great orators. And there was one, and the website or the channel handle is The Dark Santorum. And the title of it, and I got it listed, both this article and the audio story that I'm telling you about here is in the description below. But what I loved about that story here, and the story here was, I think it was titled, let's see if I can get back to it. Let's see. It always takes a minute for everything to load up. Yeah, I've seen God's plan for us, and it's terrifying. And it's a great story because what it does is it follows the journey of this one man. And he ended up, well, basically, he ended up dying in a car accident. And in that car accident, what ended up happening was he woke up in this white room, small white room. It was a couch, another chair. He ended up gravitating to the chair or to the couch because he kind of just felt like, hey, maybe this is where I need to be. Let's see. Let's stop sharing the screen here. So he goes and he sits down on the couch, and then this other gentleman all of a sudden walks in. He walks in. He's got a white suit, the whole bit, and just looks like he's got a lab coat on. Looks like a clinician. Important note here: he has a name tag, but there is no name displayed on it. Okay, so on the clipboard here, this gentleman starts asking our victim, and I can't remember his name, but the guy who died in the car crash. He realizes, hey, he's asking me these standard questions: name, date of birth, social security number. But then the gentleman asked one final question, because the guy who ended up in the car crash, he didn't realize what had happened. And things were slowly starting to come to him as he was coming to grips with the fact that he was dead and in the afterlife. And the gentleman, the clinician, was telling him, just take it slow. You can't take it all at one time, because if you do, you're going to go crazy. You just sit down, relax, we'll go through the questions. Everything will be self-explanatory once we get to the final question. So when he finally asked the final question, he says, what do you believe in? Well, the guy who ended up in the car crash, he just doesn't understand. He's like, I don't understand what you mean. Well, what do you believe in? Everybody believes in something. Some people believe one thing, other people believe another. What do you believe? Well, our guy in the car crash there, he's like, well, I don't believe in anything. I believe in nothing. Oh, the gentleman in the lab coat, he's like, well, that's rather unfortunate. Very disappointed. Because for him, this was the single most important question. Now, at this point, he leads our car crash victim down the hallway. And he says, it's almost like he's giving him a tour. And in this hallway, there are doors. Like on one door, there's it says Valhalla on it. And the gentleman in the lab coat, he's like, I really like that place, but surprisingly, nobody goes there anymore. And there's other places, there's various afterlives, like for the Vikings, like we said, Valhalla, the afterlife for the Romans and the Greeks and the Egyptians and so on and so forth. But it leads them down all the way to this elevator, and the elevator only has one button. The button's going down. And along the way, the gentleman in the lab coat reveals that he himself is God. And he was rather disappointed in the very fact that he believed in nothing. So God actually, he gets upset. He's like, you have all this opportunity to realize who I am. You had 29 years, 7 months, 13 days, and 14 hours. And in all that time, you could not grasp what a simple 5-year-old could grasp. How is that possible? Out of all the things that you just seem to think mysteriously everything happened as it did. When you take a look at, the chemistry of your eye, the circulatory system, everything else like that. He said, the reason why, and this is where at the beginning of our story, we talked about the name tag. The name tag had no name on it. This is where God reveals, he goes, the reason why you noticed there was no name on my name tag was because that's how you knew me. Everyone else, they knew me by something, by some name, but they knew me. But you knew me as nothing. So therefore, I take no great joy or anything in doing this. But nothing is where you will go. And at that point, this individual, our car crash victim, He is being escorted by angels now. And the angels aren't the beautiful things that you might think from certain bits of literature. They're kind of creepy. But then again, this genre of writing is a bit creepy. And they send him into this pit of nothingness, black, a void. Now, mind you, our crowd crash victim, like I said at the beginning, was indeed an atheist. At this particular point, he has now come to believe it all. And he's begging for forgiveness. But now, as he's descending into this darkness, all of a sudden he feels a jolt in his body. And having felt that jolt, all of a sudden things can become fuzzy. They become blurry. He's in, he's out. He closes his eyes, opens them up once again, and he's back amongst the land of the living, surrounded by people trying to revive him. Apparently, he had been clinically dead for a few minutes, but in that time, he had come to understand that just because one does not believe in something does not necessarily make it not true. So, when the Pope says things like, well, you don't necessarily have to believe in God in order to get to heaven, well, I kind of think that's part of the whole kit and caboodle. This idea that you're just going based upon your consciousness, or whatever. That you're trying to do good deeds or what. I mean, I suppose good deeds could do the trick. But again, if you're living based upon your conscience, what about those with no conscience? What about those that are sociopaths? What about those that just don't give a F? Now, generally speaking, I like to say that I'm a person who doesn't give a fuck, but people that know me know I do. I'm just a little harsh about how and what I say, but I actually do give a damn. So I guess my message is here overall, especially when it relates to this particular story. And like I said, the articles are in the description down below. Think about it, guys. You don't necessarily have to believe in something, and that's true. You don't want to believe in God? That's fine. Doesn't mean God's not real. But you got to deal with the consequences of that belief system, of those actions you take. It's a gamble. But then again, I suppose waking up every morning is just that as well. But anyway, I just want to do a quick little show here. I just kind of want to give the parable of the story versus the article from the Pope. And yes, I'm still not a fan of the Pope by any stretch of the imagination. And I'm Roman Catholic. So, yeah, try to reconcile that one. Anyway, guys, I'm going to be live here Tuesday night, 8 o'clock p.m. Central Standard Time, the Caramel Conservative Podcast. Make sure you check out our website, plusultramedia.com. Make sure you check out the past shows, all that other good stuff there. Hit me up on all social media. All that stuff is down in the description below. And I will check in with you guys later on. Good night. God bless. I'm out.